Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis with Forbes Breaking News. Joining me now is meteorologist and Forbes senior contributor, Dr. Marshall Shepard. Dr. Shepard, thank you so much for coming back on once again.
Thank you for having me, Brittany. It's really a serious situation evolving in the Caribbean right now.
It's really a serious situation. You and I talked about Hurricane Beryl before it battered the Caribbean. Now it's flip-flopping between, it was a Category 3, Cat 4, Cat 5. It's a major hurricane, and you wrote this for Forbes. It's an unprecedented, at the time it was Category 5, hurricane that is stunning scientists. Talk about why it is so stunning.
Well, it's still stunning, even though it has ticked down to a Category 4, a strong Category 4 hurricane with sustained winds of 155 miles per hour. Um, you just don't see this type of hurricane with this type of strength this early in the hurricane season, Brittany. Typically, the first hurricane that we expect, period, is around August 11th. And to have a Category 4, Category 5 hurricane, and I've seen some of the preliminary images out of Grenada and some of the surrounding islands essentially destroyed. And now Hurricane Beryl is making a direct path towards Jamaica with an expected landfall or interaction with Jamaica tomorrow, Wednesday.
This is a major hurricane. It's going between Category 4 and Category 5. Talk about the difference there, if there is one.
There really isn't. That's why I try to tell people not to get too hung up on category. There are these sort of artificial sort of breakpoints that we use to determine category based on the Saffir-Simpson scale, which is a wind scale. Currently, sustained winds are at 155 miles per hour. That makes it a strong Category 4 hurricane. Just a few more miles per hour wind, and it would be a Category 5, so it would be a lower end Category 5. I don't blur the lines there. The damage or impacts would be essentially the same between a 155 mile per hour and a 160 or so mile per hour storm. So we're talking about, particularly with the track that Beryl is forecast to take, I'm concerned about Jamaica because here's the deal. It will either take a direct hit, or if Beryl goes just south of Jamaica, it's still on what we call the dirty side of the eye. When we talk about a hurricane, the side to the right of the eye is what we call the dirty side. That's where the winds are strongest, and you add those to the forward motion of the storm, and you get elevated winds, and that's also where the storm surge is most significant. So I'm really concerned about storm surge, the winds, extreme rainfall. There's really elevated terrain in Jamaica, which can also lead to landslides, mudslides as well.
Like you said earlier, we saw completely devastating images coming out of Beryl's wake. You are concerned about Jamaica because it could either be directly in the eye or the dirty side of the eye. A, how should people prepare there? And B, are we going to see the same images coming out of Jamaica that we saw coming out of those other Caribbean islands?
Well, I certainly hope not, Brittany. I do not want to see the same type of images coming out of Jamaica because it's a far more populated island. I imagine there may be tourists there as well. And what concerns me most is people in Jamaica haven't seen anything close to this type of storm since around 2007 or so, or I believe it was so with hurricane. I can't remember the hurricane that happened, but it's been a while. I think it was 2007, but it's been a while since they've experienced this type of storm. And so people can get what I call hurricane amnesia. They forget how to react. They forget what to do. On top of that, you have people perhaps there that have never experienced anything like this at all. But here's the fact that I want to convey. No one in Jamaica has seen a storm this strong in July, early July, right before 4th of July. This is the strongest storm we've seen at this particular date since we've been keeping records. So it's an unprecedented storm. If you have not been able to get out by now, I mean, I hopefully people that can leave can perhaps get out if they're traveling back from vacation. But those people that are there, hopefully they are taking the adequate protections that they need with their homes and with their safety.
You're really raising the alarm bells here, and I really appreciate it. It is an unprecedented storm. So what is concerning you most when you see Beryl and its path going to Jamaica and beyond?
So it's really interesting. I'm still holding hope that between now and Wednesday afternoon, There is a little more wind shear that the storm will be moving into. And as I've talked about before with you, Brittany, hurricanes like really warm water. There's plenty of that. And they also don't like a lot of wind shear, which is changes in wind speed or direction as you go up in height. So I'm still hoping that the wind shear will knock the storm down a few more miles per hour. But based on the latest data that I just saw before I came on with you, at 5 o'clock from the National Hurricane Center, they are still forecasting this storm to be a major hurricane, which is at least Category 3 or higher. And so that is of concern to me because it's going to either be a direct hit or in the dirty side of the eye. Now, once we get beyond Jamaica, I think the Cayman Islands will have impacts as well. So if you're listening or watching or have folks in the Cayman Islands, they will have experiences as well. Once we get further into the Western Caribbean, I think places like the Yucatan Peninsula will experience Hurricane Beryl. Hopefully, it will have weakened some, but we don't know that for certain. It looks like there's some trends towards weakening to just a hurricane, not a major hurricane. And then as we look further out for the weekend, is the storm going to impact the U.S. coast? There's some models hinting that the southern coast of Texas around Corpus Christi or Brownsville could be impacted. Other models are hinting at more northern Mexico. I think within the next day or so that will clarify, but if you're anywhere from the Mexican coast to the middle part of the Gulf Coast of Texas, you need to be paying attention to this storm now and perhaps even have a plan.
And is it normal when you see a storm continuing to make landfall in other islands? Does it usually become stronger or does it weaken as it hits different places?
It really depends. Oftentimes, some of these Caribbean mountains can have elevated terrain, hills and mountains that can weaken the storm or tear it down some. The water temperatures are not a problem with this storm. They're certainly warm enough to continue strengthening. So our only real hope is that we can get some of that wind shear to knock back the storm a little bit in terms of intensity. Because the more it stays over that warm water, if there wasn't really weak wind shear around or wasn't really strong wind shear around, that thing can really pop. So I think the next several days will be very important because our models are pretty good between about 3 and 5 days, particularly with track. The intensity forecast, Brittany, I'm just going to be honest, as a scientist in this field, we are much better with intensity forecasts with hurricanes than, I'm sorry, with track forecasts than intensity forecasts. We generally are much better with telling you where it's going. There are often oscillations in terms of intensity because that intensity is often governed by things happening inside the hurricane that we can't always measure.
So let's talk about that track a little bit. You did touch on that it's going to be hitting Southeast Texas. So let's say you're in Southeast Texas.
Maybe.
Potentially. It
Yeah.
has the potential to hit Southeast Texas. What are you doing right now? Because we're coming up on the holidays.
Oh, I know. So I think around Saturday, Sunday, and Monday would be the time frame, probably late Saturday into early Monday, that if it were to make a slight jog to the northwest and affect the Texas coast, I think that's the time frame that we're dealing with. Again, I think the next day or so are critical. I think by late Wednesday, early Thursday, I'm going to have a better idea of whether Texas is going to be in play or it's going to stay in northern Mexico. I think some of our best models are hinting at both, and that's just the challenge of models. We have different models with different assumptions and different physics in them, but typically within about 4 to 5 days, they start to converge. So I think that we will have a much better idea, but right now, let me emphasize, places like Brownsville and Corpus Christi are certainly very much in play, and if you're living in those places, you should be paying close attention, perhaps already thinking about plans, again, because once we clarify the track within the next day or two, you only have a slight window of time at that point to make decisions.
You indicated yesterday, Dr. Shepard, that we should brace ourselves for an active hurricane season. I know you said there's something on your radar after Beryl. Can you talk about that? Has that developed since yesterday?
Well, I think that one that's after Beryl, we're still keeping an eye on, but I don't think that that storm is going to develop into anything like it initially looked like. And part of the reason may be because of Hurricane Beryl. One of the things that these hurricanes do is they churn up cold water. And if there's a storm coming behind that initial storm, that cold water may be sort of, kind of tamp down the potential development or intensity of the next storm. And so Couple that with increasing wind shear, I am not as concerned about that second storm as I was perhaps 3 days ago when you told me. But I think right now all eyes are on Beryl. But I want to emphasize, and a lot of people may have missed this, there was actually a sea storm that made landfall in Central America, Mexico, a few days ago. So we are already up to what would be the D storm, and we're not even into 4th of July yet. So this is a bad omen for the hurricane season, which we have been projecting for a month. I've written in Forbes several months ago warning that this was going to be an active hurricane season, and so far it's unfortunately hyperactive.
And we usually see the bigger storms later in the season. Do you think we're still going to see those later in the season, or did everything just
Sure.
move up by a month?
No, no, no. We're no. That's what's so concerning. I mean, August, September, and October. That's prime time for these storms, and there's no reason to believe that we won't see this type of activity. I hope not, but we certainly expect hurricane activity to start ramping up in August, and so we're just getting a preview. And I hate to call it an appetizer because it's a bad taste in my mouth, but we're getting a preview perhaps of what the peak of the season will bring. And that's why people need to be cognizant of what's going on in the Caribbean. If you've got plans to travel in those parts of the country or the world, or even here in the U.S. Gulf Coast and even East Coast, this is going to be one of those seasons like we saw in 2005 and in 2020 and 2021. I fully predict that we will probably run out of hurricane names as we did in those seasons. And in the past, we've had to go to the Greek alphabet when we run out of names. But this year, for the first time, we'll be using a supplemental name list, a new set of names.
Dr. Shepard, per usual, I thank you so much for coming on here, breaking down the latest, informing our viewers. Dr. Shepard, thank you so much for the conversation.
Thank you so much. And everyone, please stay safe.